Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the PhinManiacs.com podcast. I am your host, Louis Sung, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Chad Ronnebaum. We got a lot of stuff to talk about, as usual, and probably the biggest thing ever in Dolphins' recent history is that, ladies and gentlemen, the Miami Dolphins are finally back in the playoffs. We didn't get the chance to discuss it last week, but now we're going to get all of our playoff feels out of the way so that we can actually discuss this in a hopefully more intelligent and logical scenario. We're going to be discussing the injuries. We're going to be discussing the fact that the Dolphins actually got there to begin with. Maybe we'll reflect back on the season and how we got to where we are now. So it's an amazing thing that has happened that the Dolphins managed to get here in the first place. Starting out 1-4, looking like one of the worst football teams in recent history. They were all the way down to 31st at one point in the power rankings, with only the Cleveland Browns above them, rather below them, because they just hadn't won a game. And finally, Cleveland did manage to win a game. So hooray for Cleveland! They got their win. But it's pretty clear that when you're only one team ahead of Cleveland, then you have found yourself in a situation where you don't want to be. And then all of a sudden Pittsburgh shows up, how ironic, and the Dolphins just turn things around. Suddenly Jay Ajayi becomes a focal point. Suddenly the Dolphins offense starts to click. Suddenly the defense starts to look maybe just a little bit better. Not great, but a little bit better. And now the Dolphins finish the season 10-6, playoff wild card, which was actually clinched a week before the final game of the season. So it wasn't like we were biting our nails at the final game, hoping and praying that it was happen. Regardless of the outcome against the Patriots last week, we were going to the playoffs. Which, just thinking about that, it's ridiculously amazing the turnaround that Adam Gase has managed to inspire in his football team. And that is, mind you, without Ryan Tannehill for the past 3 games. He was down with an injury. He went back to practice today, but he's not going to be playing against the Steelers. So he had his backup Matt Moore in for a few games. You were missing Jordan Cameron, who, while he didn't do much, he is the starter, and he was the starter for a reason. So then you had to deal with Deion Sims and Marquise Gray, who recently signed another 2-year extension, so he'll be around for a couple of years more. You had Mike Pouncey, who was out again. You had Jawan James, who was doing at right tackle, so he was never that particularly great. He was always making a lot of mistakes and shutting his team down, and they still managed to overcome that. On defense, you lost Byron Maxwell again. You injured Tony Lippett. You're down Issa Abdul-Quddus. You're down Rashad Jones. You're down starting linebackers. You're down defensive ends who were supposed to be really good but never did. I'm looking at you, Mario Williams. And now they released Jason Jones because he was upset. This is according to Barry Jackson of the Miami Herald, by the way. They released veteran defensive end Jason Jones because he was not happy about the fact that he was not going to play on Sunday, and he requested his release so that he could hopefully latch on with another playoff team. First of all, that's pathetic. Second of all, I am so sorry that you feel that way, Mr. Jason Jones, because you had actually done pretty well for Miami, and I had assumed that everybody was buying into whatever Adam Gase was selling. I guess there was one player who decided that since he was not going to play on Sunday, he didn't want to stick around. Well, I'm sorry for you, and I hope I hope you find success wherever it is you go. But in any case, I want to just take a moment and reflect back on the season, Chad, and I want to get your thoughts. I want you to reflect back and tell us about the way you feel now that Miami has gotten to the point where they are.
Personally, for me, Louis, it's all about Adam Gase right now. I don't believe we had a significantly better roster than we have had the last couple years, and he's had a success with them, and his adaptability has been phenomenal, and that's what I've really been hoping for a while now, for decades now, ever since Shula left. And I've been hitting the table saying, look, what was so special about Shula is he changed his game plan to adjust to what he had for players. And Gase has done nothing but do that all year. I mean, he came in and he led Miami immediately to a 1-4 start because he was trying to install the offense he had succeeded with in the past with people like Peyton Manning. He wanted to run a high-paced, no-huddle offense that went really, really quick and kept the defense off balance. And Miami just wasn't ready. They have a lot of young players. They hadn't been exposed to this system. This was Ryan Tannehill's first time with it. And they were struggling to execute. And that's why Miami was losing those games early on, is they were just making so many mistakes. And even at that point, I was like, man, maybe Gase is in over his head. These guys are just not ready to play on Sunday. You can see they're lacking execution. And he completely changed the game plan up. And he's had so much thrown at him. I mean, you don't get Jordan Cameron. So what does he do? He just goes and gets Marquise Gray off the street and turns him into suddenly a good tight end. And he just kept filling in the gaps. There'd be an injury here, and he would adjust, and his team has been nothing but adjusting on the fly all year. And that's exciting to me because I thought the draft class really worked out pretty well. I mean, obviously, getting Tunsil late, was an odd scenario, but clearly I've made the point, if at the time when we drafted Tunsil, there was a lot of people that were kind of grumbling like, man, we didn't even need a left tackle in this draft. What are they doing? And I was looking at that like, they just went and took the best available player on the board. But where would we have been this year without Tunsil in there right now? I mean, whether he's playing guard or left tackle for us, he's been a really good football player. And it really appears like he's going to be a good football player for a long time for the Dolphins, and they're in the trenches. And so you throw in Xavier Howard, who's looked at times pretty good at corner. He needs, to get some repetitions and get some snaps under his belt and really learn the game a little bit more. But he appears by all purposes like he can be a starting corner for a long time. And that's already, foreign territory for the Dolphins for the last year, is all the struggles they've had getting drafted players just to make the roster and be starters and stuff like that. So I'm pretty excited about the draft class, and you can keep going on where you got people like Kenyon Drake, who looks like he could really, be a contributor to this team. And I'm looking forward to getting Adam Gase and maybe an even more talented roster, maybe some more speed at linebacker, maybe a better all-purpose fullback type player, and just some things maybe that they're lacking, maybe another really good interior lineman, and see what he can do when he has even more weapons to work with. And it really appears that things are pointing up. And one last point I want to make, Lewis, is Adam Gase has changed the playing field. And so coaches around the league have got to be taking notice of this. And I don't know whether coaches look at this as a good thing or a bad thing, but look, this guy, he's younger than I am. He's younger than players on his team right now. He had never even had a head coaching job at any level. He'd been an assistant, through the years in college and in the pros. And here's this young guy without any head coaching experience at any level, takes the job, and he leads his team immediately to the playoffs. And now as we enter this offseason and all these vacancies are opening up, it's going to be interesting because now, our team's going to continue this circle of, recycled coaches, where are you going to hire another Jeff Fisher again, who's, failed at other spots? Are you just going to roll the dice on a young guy like Adam Gase, who may not have any coaching experiences, but he's pretty well regarded? And it's just been interesting this week, because I've seen all the interest in Vance Joseph, and I'm thinking, man, how long has it been since Miami's had any coach on their roster? I don't know I can't even remember the last time we had a coach on our roster that was being pursued by anybody as a head coach candidate.
Okay, I'm about to say, because Casey Rogers.
Well, in a sense, but I don't know that he was ever seriously considered a head coach anywhere.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? And so I guess you could say Todd Bowles, he became a head coach, but I'm just saying it's kind of an exciting time that Miami seems to finally have the coach in place. And I think this season's been about that more than anything. And this team has not quit. He seemed to know how to get his players playing up to their potential. I mean, you're talking about a guy who most people would probably around the nation consider their most viable offensive player this year would be Ajayi, and he set him at home. He didn't even let him travel with the team in the opening game of the season. And look at the season Ajayi ended up having in response to that. And he's threatened to put Juwan James on the bench. And I thought Juwan James had a good last 5 or 6 games. He's played much, much better than he did early on in the season. Jason Jones is a problem. He's gone. Mario Williams was paid big free agent dollars. He put him on the bench, and Adam Gase just has done nothing but play the best players that are performing in practice and put them in the best position to win. And this team has done nothing but respond, and that's the difference this year. Right? Like I said, this roster is not that much different than the roster the Dolphins have had in the last decade, talent-wise. But they're winning these games because they just do not quit. They play the full 60 minutes, and their passion for each other as a team is just there. And I can't attribute that to anybody more specific than Gase. That's the change in Miami right now.
And I would definitely have to agree with you, and there's no arguing that. Adam Gase has completely changed the culture of the Miami Dolphins, and I'm sure that everybody who's listening has heard this many, many, many times before, but you never really get tired of hearing it because you think about where this team was. You think about just last year when they were already bottom feeders in the NFL, and it looked like for a while that it was going to just remain that way regardless of what Adam Gase had claimed to do. He had to deal with the media and their questioning of him. He had to deal with the whole idea of, do you really know what you're doing? Is he going to be just the latest flop in the Miami Dolphins coaching search? How long until Adam Gase gets fired? And all of that stuff. And I will personally admit that I was beginning to question a lot of things. I wasn't ready to give up on Adam Gase specifically because I still liked what I was hearing from him. I didn't hate Gase for it. But there were times when we questioned his potential as a coach and maybe his overall intelligence. Maybe we were starting to believe, well, the only reason he's good is because he had Peyton Manning as his quarterback, and so he looked better than he actually was. And we questioned that. And I think that it was you specifically, Chad, earlier on, said that you questioned his ability to prepare or something along those lines earlier in the season, and I pretty much agreed with you because it's like I could not see anything that Adam Gase was doing that I really liked. Well, let me rephrase. I liked some things that he was doing, but I wasn't liking the results. He talked a lot, but nothing was happening on the field. It still looked incredibly ugly. I remember talking to Ron Caniff, who has run many podcasts in his time and is a friend of the show, and he said that he was upset over the fact that Adam Gase would not pick a running back to actually get the running game going. And I thought to myself, well, I understand your point, Ron, but the problem is that we don't have a running back yet. So Adam Gase and his running back carousel, while it may have driven some people crazy, this was him looking for somebody to stand out in game and say, okay, well, he's the guy. Finally, Jay Ajayi got his head out of his butt and got things going. So he finally realized, oh, wait, I'm not better than everybody else, and I need to earn my spot just like everybody else does. And that's when Jay Ajayi really started to click. That's the kind of, Adam Gase knows these players and how to deal with them. If Jason Jones didn't want to hang around because he wanted to play and he wanted to make sure that he got to play no matter what, then he clearly has no qualms with getting rid of him. I guess he figured Jason Jones was not so important to the team that he was bigger than the team. And he's correct, and I'm glad that he did what he did. I hope Jason Jones finds what he's looking for, but I am also glad that he's not on our team if he's going to have that sort of an attitude. It's that kind of attitude that left Jay Ajayi at home during the first game of the season against Seattle. So that kind of attitude isn't going to fly with Adam Gase. And I'm appreciating the fact that he has this no-nonsense aura about him. You hang around Adam Gase for any minute and he's not physically imposing, Chad. Like if you've ever met Adam Gase, he'll know like he's tall, but that's about it. He doesn't have muscles coming out of his earlobes like Dan Campbell. He's not somebody that you look at him and he's going to beat you up in the dark alley. He's pretty much your plain old average Joe looking kind of guy, but this man, when you look into his eyes, Chad, it's unnerving almost. Like this man is so intense in everything that he does, and he manages to do it without looking like the bully on the block. So that kind of has a lot. I think that has a lot to do with what he's doing. And the other thing that I wanted to bring up, and I guess we have to fulfill our quarterback quota for the night, is I was very, very, very low on Ryan Tannehill during the beginning of the season, and I will easily admit that because and the reason why is not because I hated Tannehill or I didn't think he could be good. I had just reached a point where I was tired of the up and down performances, and recently we had run into a lot of downs, and I was just discouraged, and I was ready to move on and hope that Tannehill could catch on somewhere else, but I was just tired of seeing the same old, same old. I thought, well, I guess this isn't going to work either, so I guess Tannehill's got to go at some point. We need to move on and try something from scratch. He's already been broken. And then, just like everything else, the Dolphins just started to click. As soon as Ajayi started running the football and the offensive line got healthy, suddenly Ryan Tannehill looked like a world beater. Now, I'm sure there are people out there who will throw numbers at me saying that Matt Moore is a better quarterback, and I don't even want to talk to those people. I don't block people on Twitter, so I don't block them, but I try to ignore them as best as I can. Matt Moore is not better than Ryan Tannehill. Please stop. I don't ever want to hear that again. I'm so tired of it, and it's kind of made me want to avoid Twitter for a long time now. But Ryan Tannehill, as soon as Ajayi took over and started being the focal point of the offense, suddenly looked like a really good NFL quarterback. Now, is that more of a kudos to Ajayi than Tannehill? You could make that argument. But then again, I have always preached on this show and everywhere else that football is a team sport, and it takes a whole team of people to get things going. Ryan Tannehill is never going to be Aaron Rodgers. He's never going to be Tom Brady. He's never going to be Drew Brees. He's never going to be any of those guys you would consider an elite quarterback. But when you have a team that can do anything at any given time, suddenly everybody looks a lot better. And Adam Gase has figured that out. And as a result, it has made Ryan Tannehill look much better. Almost immediately. It was like a night and day turnaround. First they were awful, then they were really, really good, and that's an amazing thing to me. And even as the injuries began to pile up, there were still moments where I could see that team, that 7-game winning, was it 6 games or 7 games, Chad? Did they finally lose it? They only made it to 6, and then they ran into Baltimore, right?
I think it was 6. I think you're right, Lewis.
Okay, so the 6-game winning streak. I could still see flashes of that 6-game winning streak football team, even as they lost to Baltimore and as the injuries began to pile up and you started to realize, okay, this team is starting to go down because their starting players are just falling off the edge because they're hurt. But I could still see that team, that resiliency, that ability to overcome the challenges. I was upset at the Dolphins. I was upset when the Dolphins barely beat the Jets that first game because I thought to myself, they didn't win that football game, and I still maintain that to this day. That game specifically, they didn't win it. The Jets just lost it because the Dolphins gave that game up so many times that it wasn't even funny. Now, you could make the argument. Now, people made the argument again. This is what a winning football team does. They find ways to overcome adversity. Yep, that's correct, and they proved it now, and I'm willing to give them that. But that specific game, I still maintain they didn't win that game. But once they got it on a roll, that's when things started to look a lot better. And I started crediting Gase and crediting Tannehill and giving credit to everybody because they all earned it. They earned my trust and they earned my ability to believe that, okay, this team is finally going in the right direction. I wasn't willing to believe it after the Jets game. I wasn't willing to believe it after the Browns game, and I think we both feel the same way on that front. But now, after seeing what they've done, after seeing everything that they've accomplished, despite everything else, I mean, if what happened this year had happened to a Joe Philbin Dolphins team, what do you think would have happened, Chad?
I really believe that under Joe Philbin, this team would have not had at most 6 win season. I don't think Joe Philbin would have had the ability to change things up, and it may not even been a 6-win season. This was not a team that could come out and throw the football all over the place without changing up their offense. And Adam Gase switched to using a lot more 2 tight end sets, and he really switched to trying to focus on pound the football with Ajayi. And there were a lot of times where he even openly admitted, I felt like I wanted to pass, but I had to make sure we were getting the carries to him, and we needed to stick with the run. And that paid off later in those games. In several games, Ajayi had monster runs late in the game to win those games, like the Buffalo game, like the Steelers games. And the reason is they were the teams down earlier on in the game pounding Ajayi for maybe a 3-yard run. And those are games where we've seen that, where Joe Philbin he had Lamar Miller, who might have been getting, pretty good production, but he just didn't want to run the football. He wanted to keep throwing it. And under Joe Philbin, this team would have failed miserably with the cards they were dealt this year.
And that just proves once and for all what kind of a coach that Adam Gase can become. I wasn't willing to believe it after the Jets game that pretty much, I guess you could argue, really started this whole streak thing. They beat Pittsburgh and then the Jets game, and it was just, I was disgusted with the Jets game. And they've earned my trust, and I feel like they've started to earn the trust of the Dolphins fan base. The culture has truly changed, and even if nothing goes right against the Pittsburgh Steelers, I mean, they got their butts whooped by the Patriots, but I guess that's to be expected. They are the Patriots, and they just have this system in place that says, no matter what, we're gonna win, and that's the end of the discussion. And that's just New England, and that's just them being them. But now there is a chance that the Dolphins could be a powerhouse in the AFC again. You can see the seeds being planted. We had said right from before the season even began, we had said that this was not the year to get excited. No matter what the outcome, which we assumed was going to be like 8-8, at 9-7 at best. At best, we expected 9-7, and we would just barely make it. Nothing that we expected this year truly has come to pass. What we had, I guess you could. Well, actually, I take it back. I guess what you could say is everything that we expected, Gase surpassed. They found a way to exceed expectations. We expected for the seeds to be planted for the possibility of improving for the next season, and maybe we could be a playoff contender. We assumed that just maybe the Dolphins would actually start to look a little bit better in certain areas, and then the next year, 2017, would be the season where the Dolphins would actually be able to start making progress and moving up the chain. But no, Adam Gase didn't want to wait for 3 years. Adam Gase decided, we're going to do this right this second. And so he did. It's almost like he willed them to victory. It's almost like they decided that we're going to make this happen right before everybody expects it. We're going to sneak up on everybody and make sure that nobody sees this coming. So I'm just looking at this Dolphins football team, and I'm thinking to myself, how did you manage to do this, Adam Gase? I want to know your secret. I want to know what goes on in your head, because you have found a way to turn this less than mediocre. Less than mediocre. They were god awful last season. It was painful to watch these Dolphins play last season, and it was painful to watch them for the first 5 games of the season. When 1-4, it was just awful to watch. What did you do? Was it really just a matter of the offensive line being healthy? Was it really just that simple? Was it the fact that Mike Pouncey returned to play center? Was it the fact that Jay Ajayi became a workhorse, that we turned into a primarily running football team? Was it really that simple? Was the key to success really at our fingertips this whole time, and we had ignored it because some other coaches, some other players had this own personal vendetta that they wanted, this own personal vision for themselves that they wanted to put out there for the world? Well, did Joe Philbin really want the Dolphins to be the Green Bay Packers 2.0 so badly that he was willing to forgo any possibilities of adaptation? Was he so willing to just do things his way, to become the next West Coast superstar, that he didn't want to run the football? He just really didn't want to run the football? He didn't want to do what the Dolphins could potentially be good at? Was he so blind to what was necessary that we have been stuck in mediocrity for the past 4 years? Did Ryan Tannehill really get hurt so much in his development? Like, just think about that for a second. Just think about that for a second, specifically. I hear people telling me that if Adam Gase had Nick Foles or somebody like that this whole season, we would have had the same results. First of all, no. For a second, because Nick Foles is bad, and we know that he's bad, and he had that one really good year with the Philadelphia Eagles, and people were so willing to jump on him as the next elite quarterback. Oh, where are they now? And then we have Kirk Cousins in Washington. I'm not impressed with him either, but he's going to get paid. I don't think he's going to earn it, but he's going to get paid. So good for Kirk Cousins. And then, of course, the Matt Moore people. Yes, winning matters, but also, yes, procedure and the process matters. You look at Matt Moore playing football, it doesn't look nearly as pretty as when Ryan Tannehill throws the football, and I'm sorry. You want to talk about pocket presence? Fine, go ahead. Matt Moore has better pocket presence. You want to talk about the deep ball? Matt Moore has a better deep ball? I'll debate that with you, because I think Matt Moore's deep ball is looking pretty wobbly these days. But To say that Adam Gase would have had the same amount of success, I would say no. I would say he would still have success, but I don't think he would have gotten as far as he has, because Ryan Tannehill has done a lot to help this football team, all without complaining, all without having the back of all without having the fan base at his back, all without being able to have this support. He's done everything that he could to get the job done with a coach before Gase who did not believe in him from almost the get-go. He wanted Derek Carr. He wanted to draft Derek Carr instead of keeping Ryan Tannehill. Well, guess what? I don't think Derek Carr would be Derek Carr if he had been drafted by Joe Philbin. And I don't think anybody would really argue that matter with me. Yeah, you'd have Derek Carr. You'd have the same guy that you would have in Ryan Tannehill today, probably. Adam Gase would probably have to work with Derek Carr and undo everything that Joe Philbin did for him. So Ryan Tannehill, like, imagine, if you will, what Ryan Tannehill could have become if Adam Gase had been the head coach the whole time. We might have had the next elite quarterback, ladies and gentlemen, because Ryan Tannehill was struggling with Joe Philbin. And even then, there was a matter of, is he or isn't he? I never had a moment where I felt like he was the worst quarterback in the NFL. I knew he was struggling. I was upset with him. I was disappointed in him. But I never outright thought Ryan Tannehill is a bad quarterback. There are some people who do, because they only like wins and losses, and they're not willing to see the good with the bad. There were times when I felt the bad outweighed the good, and I decided I wanted to move on. But I never outright thought he was an awful quarterback. But Adam Gase turned all of that around. He's managed to win games with a quarterback who was in danger of losing his job, let's be perfectly honest, because that contract coming up is going to be a bit of a hit. It's going to be a significant hit, and they may even try to restructure later down the line. I don't know. I don't have any insider information on that, but if I were the Dolphins, I would try to lower that cap hit somewhat. Maybe try to spread it out and assume that Ryan Tannehill is going to be the franchise quarterback for the next few years, with Adam Gase at having his back. That's the main key here. Miami's moving up, folks. Nobody wants to give him that credit. Nobody wants to believe that the Dolphins actually have something to offer. It's reached a point where Jay Ajayi is upset that nobody's even giving them a second glance. It's reached a point where these players are thinking to themselves, hey, I know you guys like these other teams better, but come on, at least give us some credit. We got to this far. ESPN went out of it almost seemed like they went out of their way to disrespect Miami, giving them that little 1% mark of the possibility of winning the Super Bowl, and not even showing their logo. Like, you don't have enough room to show the Dolphins logo? Are you that petty over the fact that the Dolphins actually made it to the playoffs? Are you that salty, that bitter? Do you hate them that much? Now, I'm sure everybody's going to say, well, who cares what they think? Well, guess what? The players do, kind of. How would you feel if every day you went to work and you did the best job that you could do, and you watched all of your peers get kudos from the people who watched you work, from the people who are supposed to show their appreciation for everything that you do, all the work that you put in, all the things that they want, all the things that you do, and they just go unnoticed. Meanwhile, you see your competitors, your peers, they all get the same. They all get credit for what they've done, but you get nothing. And for what reason? You don't even know. What did you do wrong? Nothing. You just exist. Now, that's why I get upset with people who say, "Well, who cares what the national media thinks?" I guarantee you, the players do. They won't say it, because if they do say it, they come off as petty. I'm sure there are people who are saying Jay Ajayi should have kept his mouth shut, because who cares what they think? He should have kept his mouth shut, because who the heck is Jay Ajayi to complain about not getting any credit? Do you know which team you're on? You're on the Miami Dolphins, who are nothing. That's why they care. That's why. Because they're human, folks. These guys are not robots. Yes, they get paid. Yes, they're paid to do this job, and they go and they do this job to the best of their ability. But they would like some recognition. They would like some appreciation. They would like to be able to turn on the television, and after defeating a team that is supposedly supposed to beat them without even thinking twice, they would like to be able to say, hey, look, we're getting some props for beating this team that they were supposed to get clobbered by. What's going to happen if somehow the Dolphins manage to beat the Steelers on Sunday? And by the way, I'm actually predicting they will lose because I think the injuries have just reached a point where they can't get by anymore. And they're about to go against the big three that is Ben Roethlisberger, Antonio Brown, and Le'Veon Bell. I don't think they're going to win the game. I've just reached a point where I think Miami has reached the end of the line because this matchup is just too much for them. They're on the road, it's cold, and most of their starters, the important starters on defense specifically, are going to be out. That's why I don't think Miami gets by. But if it happens, what do you think is going to be said? Do you think they'll talk about the fact that the Dolphins have gotten this far? Are they going to actually look at the games that were played and say, look at what Adam Gase has managed to do with these Dolphins? Are they going to look back and say that the Miami Dolphins have found a way to become a good football team again? Do you think that's what the players are going to turn on the ESPN and they're going to see? I don't think that's what they'll see. I think they're going to talk about what happened to the Pittsburgh Steelers. They're going to talk about what went wrong with Pittsburgh. That annoys players. That annoys people. You see fans getting annoyed. Well, why don't you give our team any credit? And nobody answers, of course, because why should they answer? They're the media. They're ESPN. They're guys like that. They don't care. They're just doing their jobs. They're doing what makes them the money, which I understand. That's part of their job. But also part of their job is to acknowledge everybody's fan base, not just the choice few, not just the favorites, if you will. If the Dolphins beat the Steelers, they're going to talk about what was wrong with Pittsburgh, not what has Miami done. And those that do notice the Dolphins in any capacity are mixed up and confused and are ultimately misinformed, uninformed, and downright ignorant and arrogant at times. Max Kellerman of ESPN, he's on First Take now. I've watched First Take every so often just to get a laugh because I don't look at them for football knowledge anymore. He dared to say on national television that Matt Moore was a better quarterback than Ryan Tannehill. Clearly, he has not watched the games. He has done the box score thing. He has looked at the results of the game and decided, well, I see that Matt Moore threw 4 touchdowns against the New York Jets. I didn't see Ryan Tannehill do that this season. Clearly, the Dolphins have had a better quarterback sitting on the bench this whole time. He didn't watch the games. He doesn't know. And you know why he didn't watch the games? Because ultimately the Dolphins are irrelevant in their mind. And nobody likes to feel irrelevant. Nobody likes to feel like they don't matter. I don't care who you are. I don't care how much you're getting paid. I don't care what business you're in. If I were to go to work, if my co-host Chad had decided that he was going to go to work and he sees everybody around him getting credit for what they do, and he gets overlooked because why? Because they don't feel like they don't think he matters? Because his job is insignificant, even though it isn't? Because what he does is it doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things because there are going to be other people who do a better job of doing something else that is not quite the same, but it is similar. Everybody wants to be recognized. And I guarantee you that these Dolphins are going to take that motivation and they're going to run with it. I don't know if it'll be enough, but I guarantee you they're not going to stop until they're noticed. And even when they do get noticed, these guys under Adam Gase, they're going to keep fighting until they are continue to be noticed and they start getting the recognition that they already solely deserve. I'm tired of Miami being overlooked. I'm tired of them being disrespected, ignored. I'm tired of the arrogance of people who say that the Dolphins don't matter because they're the Miami Dolphins. When have they ever been relevant? They're about to be relevant. So everybody better brush up on their Dolphins history and their Dolphins recent history too, because they're coming. And it's going to drive you guys nuts. I know. And it's going to drive those ESPN and NFL Network guys crazy. I just know it is.
I don't disagree with you, Lewis. I don't think people are out to get the Dolphins. I think people, especially, this is the mainstream people. This isn't like beat writers or people that follow the team day to day. These are people that are like hosting ESPN and these people. I don't really watch much NFL Network or ESPN anymore because I've followed the team closely, and now in the event, for me, having watched them for a long time now, a good follow the Dolphins as much as I always could probably the last 20, 30 years, social media has changed a lot because now, to me, ESPN and NFL Network stuff, those things have become fairly irrelevant for me because I can see reports from you. I can see reports from Chris Perkins. I can see reports from James Walker who are actually at the practice that day. And they are giving me the most current information they're seeing. If I want to turn on, say, ESPN or NFL Network and watch a training camp update, I've learned pretty clear the last few years, those reports are so inaccurate and they're so far removed from what's actually going on that the analysts that are on TV, they're also misinformed and they really don't know. They don't know what's going on. They literally don't know that Ryan Tannehill and Matt Moore, that's a ludicrous statement if you've watched the games because they haven't watched the games. And my question is why are those people even doing those jobs if they're not going to put the time in to pay attention to what they're talking about? And so for those people, if you're in that situation, Lewis, and you are on a national network and you've got to talk about all the teams, so you don't want to make it obvious you don't know what you're talking about, you got to go with what's worked for you for a while. And what's worked for these analysts for a while is to say, look, we're going to follow the Steelers, we're going to follow the Patriots, we're going to follow the Ravens, and we're going to say those are the teams to watch and beat because historically for the last decade, those have been the teams that consistently are in the playoffs and competing to get to the Super Bowl. And Miami has not. And they are not going to jump on the Miami bandwagon until Miami's done it for a while, and then they will suddenly be talking about how good Miami is. That's all they can do, again, because they don't follow day-to-day what's going on. And so for me, it's kind of fun as a fan and as somebody that watches the games closely because I kind of see what you're seeing, Lewis, is like these guys are coming. The Dolphins, look, they played with a roster that wasn't just loaded with superstars, and they played with a lot of injuries. They played some difficult games. They had to go to Buffalo, they had to go to the New York Jets in those rival games at the end of the year. And they were able to win those games with what they had, with what Adam Gase had. And so part of me is thinking, just wait until Adam Gase gets some more horses in the stable that are even better than what he's got right now. That's when the team could suddenly become very good. And until that happens, the analysts are going to continue to be this way. And I don't understand it. I really don't get. I understand what the Dolphin side of it, how disrespectful what ESPN did was with the, they weren't even relevant enough to put their logo up. There's only so many teams in the playoffs. There's 6 teams in the AFC, and they didn't want to take time to put 6 logos up, so they just put the Dolphins as irrelevant of the other 5. So I don't get it. To me, it was poor judgment on whatever editors ESPN had because it just looks unprofessional. And, again, that's case in point why I don't really pay that close of attention to ESPN or NFL Network anymore other than maybe to watch games or highlights because they, from a information standpoint, those are the people that are irrelevant. ESPN and NFL Network is irrelevant. And I don't know how else you want me to say that, but if you're listening to somebody like Deion Sanders or Michael Irvin, you just got to understand these guys are clueless what's going on day to day in Miami. They are not paying attention to that. They're just going off a script, and when they are asked to give their review as an analyst, they're just falling back to the teams that have historically worked for them. So I don't think it's disrespect for the Dolphins. I think that's just, you just are dealing with uninformed analysts. That's the way I describe it.
But that's the thing, Chad, is that, and this is why players get upset. Like Jay Ajayi has probably been holding this in for a while now, and he finally decided he was going to snap. And it wasn't even that he said anything like, "Oh, you guys don't care about us." He just said, like, we would like to be noticed too. Okay, you always talk about, like, folks always talk about the other team and what they have and what they can't do or what they can do. And leaving off the Dolphins, how irrelevant are they? It's like you had the other 2 teams, like you had the Texans there. They had a logo, but their number was only like 2%. Like, really, 2% for the Texans, and you'll put their logo. But you guess, and who even comes up with the percentages anyway? That's what I want to know. Who comes up with these percentages to win the Super Bowl? Yeah, of course, New England is going to be number 1 because they're the New England Patriots. They're always a favorite to win the Super Bowl. That's just kind of how it works. But you have but these guys, again, these players notice that these guys, you talk about the national media, and these guys, they always go with their guns, the guys who always work for them, the teams that have made them look good in the past. They talk about the Patriots because the Patriots always win, the Steelers, the Ravens, but they're willing to talk about other teams. They'll talk about the Texans nonstop. They'll talk about the Raiders, and they recently come on strong, but they have this young quarterback named Derek Carr who has just lit up the NFL or something like that. The Falcons are suddenly national news, and they've been talking about them all year. And the Falcons haven't been relevant for a very long time, Matt Ryan notwithstanding. So why are they so willing to jump on the Falcons bandwagon? Because Matt Ryan? Is that the only reason why? I guess that's fine, because you have this MVP candidate in the quarterback. You could make that argument. Dallas Cowboys are always high on the hype list. They haven't been winners, so to speak, up until this year. They finally managed to become a team that you can expect to make the playoffs every year, but only just recently. It wasn't like they were always this perennial all-star team. How many 8-8 seasons did they have before things started to look up for the Cowboys? But they'd always talked about the Cowboys because they're America's team and whatnot. So it's not just the winning teams they pick. They pick specific teams that they've been fans of, teams that for a long time they thought, man, I really like this team. Let's talk about this team. And if people who are Dolphin fans, there are a few people out there who are actually fans of the Dolphins, but they get ridiculed for being fans of the Dolphins. And not ridiculed in the sense that, oh, haha, it's kind of like, oh, your team, they're not going to beat my team or whatever. No, these guys were mocked mercilessly because the Dolphins were such an awful team. I watched, again, I go back to First Take, and I understand it's not a good example because First Take makes fun of everybody pretty much, but that's pretty much the only show on ESPN I've ever watched other than Highly Questionable, and that's the only reason I watched that is because Boppy is funny. But in any case, I watched them make fun of the Dolphins and say that their quarterback was horrible. At the time, it was Tannehill. And that was during the winning streak. During the winning streak, you're willing to say that Ryan Tannehill is horrible. But last year, everybody was praising Ryan Fitzpatrick for the job that he was doing. So you were willing to jump all over that Jets bandwagon. But Miami? And that's why I get so uppity about this, Chad, because it's specific teams. The Jets look like this sudden turnaround team. Oh my gosh, look what the Jets are doing. It's amazing. Ryan Fitzpatrick has become a great quarterback, and they can count on him to get the job done. And Brandon Marshall and Todd Bowles and all these guys, they've turned it around. The exact same storyline, but on a higher level, because this looks permanent. This looks like a permanent thing that would happen. The exact same thing has happened with Adam Gase, who is a rookie head coach. Don't they love talking about rookie head coaches? Don't they love talking about this newfangled thing that's going on? They know that Adam Gase was in high demand. They knew all that. But they purposely chose. They had to have purposely chosen this, because why would you talk about the Jets all 2015, but when Miami does almost literally the exact same thing with a rookie head coach, they ignore it. Every step of the way, they ignore it, or they dismiss it, or it doesn't mean anything. But for the Jets, they hyped it up. They made it look like these guys were on the rise. That's why I get upset, Chad, because these guys are not just like national analysts just going with whatever they feel like it. These guys have some control over what they talk about. They purposely choose not to talk about Miami, or when they are forced to, they dismiss it as if it was nothing. That's why I get upset, and I think that's why the players are upset too. They understand the job; they have to do the job all the time. But I think the reason I think the reason Ajayi gets so upset is because he sees that his teammate and his team is being summarily dismissed for no apparent reason other than, well, they just don't feel like it.
Yeah, no, I understand that from the player standpoint. I think. As much as a player, I think it's got to be hard for those guys to ignore the media, whether it's you're getting negative publicity or no publicity. And I would say that it's a fair statement to say the Dolphins have been largely overlooked for the season they've had. And I don't know.
And I only compare that because of the Jets last year. I want that to be clear.
Yeah, and the Jets are in the New York market. I'm sure that there's a lot of New York-based media that covers the team. And so I'm sure that has some impact as well. But I don't know. I guess I just don't. I'm probably a bad person to comment on it because I just don't pay that close of attention at all anymore to the national media. I'm much more interested in the people that are on the ground close to what's going on. And I watch, honestly, I used to, growing up as a kid, I always watched the Today shows, that were on NBC or CBS or whoever had the contracts at that time when we're putting on those Today shows, because that was the only source of information I had to learn about what had gone on for the week or what was going on. And so, that's what it was. But I haven't in years, Lewis, I haven't even watched the NFL Today or whatever ESPN puts on, because I've turned it on sporadically here or there, and I literally turn it off within 5 minutes because all I just see is some people on there that mainly have the jobs because they were football players before, so people know who they are. But when I hear them talk, it's just so obvious to me they have no clue what they're talking about relative to what's going on at that specific situation. And so I just don't find it that enlightening, I guess, when I hear the national media. And I'm not trying to rip the national media. I think that's just probably the reality, because they're covering 32 teams. And they're also, just like every other media outlet, they're trying to get ratings. They're trying to sell papers, or they're trying to sell website hits, or they're trying to improve viewer ratings. And so I think they tend to maybe focus on what they think is going to get the ratings higher versus what the actual situations are. But I will tell you this. I got gas this week, and there's a guy that works at one of the gas stations who's a big Steelers fan, and I went in there and I was wearing my Miami Dolphins stocking hat. And he just said, man, he's like, I was really hoping that we were going to get a different team. Like, I would have much rather played the Raiders, or he said, because I didn't want to play the Dolphins. And what that is who cares what the national media thinks? I will tell you this. The Steelers players and the Steelers fans distinctly remember the beatdown Miami put on them. And they're nervous because Miami beat the snot out of them the last time they played. This was not Miami getting a few lucky breaks or a few bad calls from the ref that allowed them to steal a win from Pittsburgh. Miami physically beat them into the ground and ran them over with Jay Ajayi. And so, as much as people want to disregard the Dolphins, that's hard to overlook. And that's the people that are not overlooking right now are the people in Pittsburgh, because they're trying to think, we got to be careful, because the last time we played these guys, we lost the battle on both sides in the trenches. And yeah, I know Miami has injuries in the defensive backfield, and I know they've got injuries at the linebacker position, but for the most part, the majority of players that were on both those lines are playing in this game. And, that's why I was just saying, I don't think it's a foregone conclusion the Steelers have this game won. I agree with you, Lewis. I believe Pittsburgh's going to win it too, because of all the injuries Miami's dealing with. But that's the thing that I'm just pointing out is, you've got to respect the fact that Miami beat them down. They hurt Ben Roethlisberger the last time the Dolphins played them. And so if you're a Steelers fan and you're thinking we want to try to advance in the playoffs, you have in the back of your head, man, I hope Sue does not get a hold of Roethlisberger, because Big Ben might be big, but he is just like any other quarterback. They don't want to let Ndamukong Suh get a hold of him, because it just doesn't end well for quarterbacks when Sue gets to him. And so I'm kind of excited about the game. I really don't care about, if anything, it's a good thing, because the Steelers probably weren't all excited that ESPN pulled up the 1% statistic and gave the Dolphins kind of a cold shoulder as being irrelevant, because it does nothing but make the Steelers' job harder, because there's some players in Miami right now that they're not just going in and try to win this game. They're going in to make a statement. And so that means, in my mind, this isn't going to be an easy game that you just can script out. This is going to be a very physical football game, and this has been the type of game Miami has been able to come out on top in the end when it gets to be a knockdown, drag-out type of football game. So part of me is like, Miami doesn't have the personnel right now to go in and do a shootout type game with Ben Roethlisberger and Antonio Brown. What I would much rather see is a cold game that's hard to throw the football in, and which team's going to be more physical, because the national media did nothing but just help Miami's chances in a game like that, in my opinion.
I can understand that point. I'm just at a point, Chad, where I feel like, what does Miami have to do to really make it on the map? Because they didn't always talk about the Steelers or the Ravens. They recently came on and decided to cement themselves in that mold. The Texans aren't even that good, but they're talking about the Texans all the time. The Raiders came out of nowhere, and suddenly they're the talk of the town. Like, who cares about... Like, I mean, I hate to make it sound like this, but who the heck cares about Oakland, especially since Oakland won't be Oakland next year? They're going to the desert. They're going to Las Vegas. Are they still going to talk about them because the market is different? Because, like, I understand Las Vegas and all that stuff, but is the market of one city big enough to take over all of California? I don't think so. So they talk about the Raiders because they want to talk about the Raiders and Derek Carr and all that stuff. I'm hoping that Miami will find a way to get people to look at them and say, well, hang on, they managed to do something. Maybe we need to be keeping an eye on them. That's all I'm saying. I just want them to get the recognition that they deserve, because, like, and we kind of talked about this with Troy the last show. Like, I also want them to be noticed for all the off the field stuff that they do. I understand Troy's point. Like, we don't care if we get noticed or not. We're just going to do our part. And that's great. I love that. But so many people have this negative perception of the NFL. People who are not necessarily fans of football. Don't you think it would be wise, Chad, to highlight the fact that this football team that they ignore every step of the way, is leading the charge, if you will, in trying to make their communities, their world, a better place? And that would be good business, as well as just smart advertising to get another market back in your share. I think the reason that places like ESPN and NFL Network have started to fall off the map is because they don't cater to everybody. It's always the same storylines. It's always the same players being highlighted. It's always the same highlights. It's the same everything all the time. And you lose cities when you do that. You have to give a little bit of attention to everybody. What do you think? James Walker is not always at the facility just doing whatever the heck he's doing. Why don't you call him up and let's see what the Dolphins are doing for a segment every once in a while? Why don't we see what this other team is doing? Why don't we talk about the Browns for a little while? That way every team gets a chance to shine, and you would get people to come in and tune in because they're going to have their moment to talk. That's just smart business. And by highlighting the Dolphins' community work, and just give them that much at least. Highlight the Dolphins' community work. Which, by the way, they're going to be having a garage sale from 10 to 12, so if anybody's interested in that, so get on that as soon as you can. So hurry up to Hard Rock. My point is to get people who are down on the NFL to actually like the NFL again. Why don't you highlight what this football team is doing to prove that, look, we're not just a bunch of brutes in uniforms smacking each other upside the head. We do a lot to make this world a better place. We do a lot of work outside of our football lives to try and make people happy. That's something that those who may be a little iffy on the NFL as a whole would notice and think, wow, so these guys aren't as bad as we think they are. That to me just sounds like smart business. But the moment while the Dolphins get no recognition at all, the moment the New England Patriots have themselves a Christmas party for kids, oh no, they're all over that. Because they're the Patriots, I guess. But that's not smart business. So you only highlight it when it's the Patriots doing it? Okay, first of all, these people already know what the Patriots do because people watching are always Patriots fans. They're not talking about the NFL anyway. So why doesn't the NFL put out this piece on what it is that the Dolphins do in the community and why there's something to be looked up to? Give people a reason to be exploring the possibility of liking the NFL. Give people a possibility to explore new teams. People get tired of it because it's always the same crap. They talk about New England, they talk about Pittsburgh, they talk about Baltimore. It's like, we are bored. What's next? What else you got? I just think of it as a smart business move on top of the whole giving respect to the team that we're fans of, Chad. Wouldn't it be smart business, don't you think, to give these other teams a little bit of a spotlight, because then they would actually get other markets involved?
Yeah, I think. I mean, it's just. I don't want to be depressing, but it comes down to money, and the NFL and ESPN would just rather not have to accommodate having people on site to see the things that you see when you go to all the events that these teams do. And it's just much easier, I think, for them to say, well, you know what, let's just play a Play 60 commercial during the intermissions, and then that's our contribution. So at least we are doing something that appears to be community-based. I don't know how else to say it, because, I mean, you go to a lot of the events, and do you see people there from ESPN, Lewis, that are covering those events?
No, but that's Walker's choice, really.
Well, yeah, but the ESPN obviously doesn't deem it worthwhile. And so, or I shouldn't say they don't deem it worthwhile. They don't deem it worth sending somebody to cover it. It's much easier for them, probably as a business, to say, we'll just throw in a Play 60 commercial or something that is community related, so that they're doing some community things, but they're not going to emphasize it, probably because in their mind it doesn't make them that much money. And I mean, that's just the side of sports when it comes to somebody like ESPN or even the NFL, that, you know, a lot of people are passionate and look at the things that people do to help other people that are part of the NFL, but those organizations as a whole, they're businesses that are trying to make money. And that's always the way it has been. And unfortunately, you at times see those places make decisions, I think, maybe based more on the bottom line than maybe what might be for the better good. I don't know how else to say it, but it's not something I hold against them. That's just the reality of how the NFL and the major networks operate.
Yeah, I get you. All right, I've blown off my steam. God, I'm just so miffed, Chad. I'm like Ajayi. I'm miffed that they've been ignored for so long. But if they manage to beat Pittsburgh, then maybe they'll start getting a little bit of maybe some warning flags will start to light up in these guys' minds. But anyway, let's talk about the game a little bit. Sunday, 1 o'clock. At least the sun will be shining, if nothing else, with any luck. So they won't be completely freezing, because I know you want it to be cold, Chad, but I don't want it to be frozen to the bone so that these guys aren't ready to go. I'm a little worried, again, because of the secondary. I don't know how well Tony Lippett and Xavier Howard are going to be able to do against the likes of Antonio Brown. I don't know how much I trust the linebackers and the defensive line to actually be able to stop Le'Veon Bell. I know they did it before in Miami, but Le'Veon Bell was just starting to get into a rhythm. He was just trying to get his feet under him, if you will. Now he's got his groove on, and that worries me. Big Ben is totally healthy again, and I don't think we're going to get lucky enough to be able to hurt him again. Not that, and I will say this much: he didn't look good even when he was healthy, but the fact that he'd be healthy all game long concerns me. And supposedly their defense has looked much better as compared to when we faced off against them the first time. And the same goes to their offensive line. So that does concern me. The fact that Byron Maxwell, again, won't be playing, and even he doesn't, like, I saw a report today, even he doesn't know why his ankle is still hurting the way it is. Even he doesn't know why he hasn't been able to get back onto the football field. Normally he'd come up with some excuse. Normally players would come up with some way to say, well, I'm rehabbing, I'm trying to do my best to get back on there. But Maxwell seems sincerely confused. He doesn't know why his ankle's still acting up. He wants to play. Because it's not like Mario Williams saying, oh, well, I've been hurt, and that's why I'm not doing well, and that's why I'm not playing. It's like Maxwell wants to get out there, but he can't figure out why his ankle still hurts. That bugs me. That actually concerns me, and I think Miami's going to be seriously missing him. So I don't know what's up with Maxwell, but I'm concerned.
Yeah, I don't either. I mean, obviously that's something that's going on with him, and I just have to assume it just hasn't healed as quickly as that he or the trainers would have hoped. I agree with you that it is a big loss, because I actually think Xavier Howard's got more talent in terms of speed and recovery and stuff, maybe compared to Byron Maxwell. I think that's the case, but he definitely doesn't have the experience. And even more so is Byron Maxwell did a pretty good job at containing Antonio Brown when they played the last game. And so it is a big loss. And he's one of those guys that I don't quite get the negative vibe he had throughout the year. There were a lot of people I've seen that follow the team that have been pretty down on Byron Maxwell. And, kind of when we talked when he came to the team, I'm like, I'm not looking at him as a, Patrick Peterson or Darrelle Revis is just a shut down corner, but at the same time, he's a solid veteran corner that you can put in there and play. And he's done nothing but be a stable cornerback for the Dolphins all year. I mean, I don't recall that often where teams beat the Dolphins by really taking advantage of Maxwell. He's been solid, and I don't get it. And I agree with you. They're going to miss him. They don't have a corner on the roster right now that has the experience he has, which is just really, really important in the playoffs. And so we're probably looking at playing a Tony Lippett, who's probably not going to be 100%, and an inexperienced player in Xavier Howard. And so not a great situation in the defensive backfield when you throw in, we've lost our two starting safeties along with that, and we're taking on, Ben Roethlisberger and the Steelers. So it's tough. And that's why I was making the point I would rather have it be a cold game that's hard to throw in, because right now that is the number one concern I have. I think with Kiko Alonso, and I think Jelani Jenkins is going to play some in this game, and when Neville Hewitt, and I think the Dolphins will be okay at running back. I think their defensive line is pretty strong. I think the real weakness is can we actually stop the passing attack that the Steelers have, and we are definitely banged up in the secondary, and that's clearly in our game our weakness right now that you have to be concerned about.
So that's going to be your biggest concern for the game, is the secondary?
For me, it really is. Ndamukong Suh and those guys up front, they were very effective with the Steelers the last time we met, and I don't have any reason to believe that the Steelers are going to struggle with the Dolphins up front. And we talked a little bit about this before we had the show going, Lewis, that Le'Veon Bell is not a running back that comes really fast up the gut and slams in there. Or he's not a guy that's extremely quick that runs around the outside and he's hard to catch. He's a really patient runner. He has a good combination of size and speed, but when you watch Le'Veon Bell, he just kind of like has this little I don't know the right word, but he doesn't run full steam. He just kind of has this jog to when he gets the ball, and he's waiting for his blocks. He's waiting to see where the defense commits before he picks a hole and cuts up and goes. And that style is very effective against teams that tend to use the big, heavy D tackles that like to occupy space and try to free up linebackers, and they try to have their defensive line occupy the offensive line and let their linebackers make plays. The Dolphins are much more of a team that likes to penetrate gaps and disrupt action into the backfield. And that's why Le'Veon Bell didn't do that well with the Dolphins last game, because we're going to have guys like Branch and Sue, and they'll do some linebacker blitzes. And so Le'Veon Bell will have a tough time getting going because he's going to have people attacking him in the backfield, which kind of goes counterintuitive to his style. Where they'll struggle with Le'Veon Bell is, will Miami have the linebackers that will be able to stop him catching the ball out of the backfield? He's so good at that. And will they have the defensive backfield to be able to shut down Antonio Brown? And I just don't see that working very well. Maybe if Jelani Jenkins is back to being healthy enough, between him and Kiko, they have enough linebacker speed, they may be able to just slow down Le'Veon Bell from catching the ball out of the backfield and really doing a lot of damage. But I just don't see them having – there's just too much missing. I mean, with Rashad Jones out now, and now, we're down to Rambo and Michael Thomas. And as good as Michael Thomas has been as an all-purpose player, he's not on the same level as those guys. And we're just going to have to commit two guys almost all game to be able to stop Antonio Brown. And that's probably going to open up too many other avenues for Roethlisberger and the Steelers. So my hope is that the weather makes it a little difficult to throw the football. And this comes down to a game where you got to throw a lot of short passes and really try to control line of scrimmage, because in that type of game, Miami's receivers are pretty healthy. You know, we've got Jarvis Landry, who's one of the best in the game at turning a short pass into a big gain. And we've got Ajayi, and I feel like our line's going to be up for this game. And so we need this to be a low-scoring, punch-you-in-the-mouth type game. Because I just don't think we're going to have the ability to, throw up 30 points on the Steelers at Pittsburgh.
So before we call this show a night, because I feel like we've really gotten some good stuff off of our chest and kind of let our emotions out. Really, there's not much else to say other than reporting the injuries, which we have already done. There's going to be a lot of injuries, and I don't know what the outcome is going to be, but I do want to make sure we get our predictions in, and I think we both know where we're going. But let's hear yours, Chad. How does this game turn out? What's the score?
Well, as a fan, and if I'm Adam Gase, one thing I'm telling the players is, hey, look, we have done more than anybody expected. When we started this year, when we talked, Lewis, my ultimate goal was I want to see Miami get back to the playoffs. I wasn't under any drinking any Kool-Aid that I thought Miami was going to be a Super Bowl contender. And you saw why when we played the Patriots. And it's not because Miami's bad. It's just that's how good the Patriots are. And so Miami has a ways to go to be a dominant football team. But we did what we set out to do. We wanted to get back to the playoffs. We wanted to get back to being a contender. And we wanted to get back to talking about the playoffs this time of year, not talking about the draft for next year. And so Miami has done that. And so for a game like this, if I'm the Dolphins and I'm the coach, there's no reason to be uptight. I know it's the playoffs and I know you go home, but they've already exceeded expectations by a long shot. And so this is the kind of game you can just go out and have fun. I know I'm kind of hoping Adam Gase does a little bit of unexpected things with the team, and I think that's going to help them be a little more loose. And I still believe that we're going to win the battle on the offensive and defensive lines. With that being said, it's going to be in Pittsburgh. It's a very loud, hostile stadium. It's going to be difficult to hear. As well as Matt Moore has played, this is a lot to ask Matt Moore to be able to win this game throwing the football around. So I suspect that it's just going to be too much, even for as dedicated this team is and as hard as they play, and as much as went into the season. I think the Steelers have just too many weapons right now and are just the healthier football team with home field advantage. So I'll say as a prediction, I think the score comes out somewhere around 24-14 Steelers.
Well, I'm going to have to pretty much predict a Dolphins loss as well. I mean, I have faith that this team will be moving up in future years, but I think this year, with all the injuries they've suffered, with the situation that they're in right now, I just feel like they finally reached a point where enough is too much. I am going to predict that the defense is not going to do well. I mean, that's not exactly much of a stretch, but I'm predicting that they don't do well. I am predicting that Matt Moore is not going to do well enough to overcome the shootout that it would become, because I'm sorry, folks, Matt Moore is not Ryan Tannehill, and even if they do manage to pull it out, I don't think it will be specifically because of Moore. So I'm going to say that Miami loses this game, like similarly to what happened against the New England Patriots. I'm going to say something along the lines of 35-14. I just can't see Miami winning in a shootout on the road with their backup and a bunch of backups on defense against a team that is pretty remarkably healthy, all things considered, especially with one that has this three-headed monster of Bell, Brown, and Roethlisberger. I just can't see it. So
yeah, and I'll close out one thing with that, Lewis, is to say there's a part of me right now that kind of hopes Adam Gase has some plays, maybe 3 or 4 plays, to get the ball on offense into Jakeem Grant's hands. Because if you've been following the Omar Kelly story this week, I absolutely believe that Jakeem Grant is relevant. He's had some really important kick returns, and he's obviously struggled at times on punt return to handling the ball. And young, excitable rookies, that's not uncommon. And so I think he's a weapon. The Miami just hasn't found ways to utilize him because they have a lot of weapons already on offense. But there has to be a major chip on that guy's shoulder right now. And so a part of me would like to see him somehow get a trick play that he rips off for a 70-yard touchdown run in this game, because it would be fun to see the response that some of those guys would have after Omar disrespected him so blatantly.
Well, we'll see. Clyde Christensen said recently that the Jakeem Grant thing was an experiment that didn't exactly go well this first season, and they supposedly it's going to be a priority to try and get him more involved in the offense itself, because he is a weapon on offense. The problem is that his hands are an issue. But if you're handing the ball off to him, or you're just giving him a little thing to do here and there, not making him like track the ball in the air as it's coming, if you will, this is what makes him different than Ted Ginn Jr. Ted Ginn Jr. was a speedy receiver with hands that you couldn't really trust, but he was a first rounder. Jakeem Grant was drafted in the 5th. So you can get away with him being a gimmick player. You can get away. I keep saying this, and I honestly wish that at some point they actually tried to do this. I want Jakeem Grant to be a Darren Sproles. Sproles is tiny, and he's elusive. That sounds an awful lot like Jakeem Grant. Just make it so that he doesn't have to fight so hard to get the ball in his hands. Just let him have the ball and let him do some stuff. Give him some blocking. Give him the things that are necessary. Nobody, not even Sproles, can elude people who have him literally surrounded by the time he gets the football in his hands. Like, if you have 6 guys coming at you, it's going to be very difficult for you to find a crease to sneak through, even for Darren Sproles. I'm not saying he's going to be as good as Darren Sproles. I'm not saying he'll even get close to being as effective as a weapon as Darren Sproles, but he can try and be in that role. That's all I want Miami to do. Just see if they can get him to do that. That's all I want for the next offseason. It won't happen against Pittsburgh, but I'm hoping that they take what they said to heart and make him getting into the game a priority.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, unless you have any closing thoughts, Chad, I'd say we'll call it a night.
No, I would just say enjoy the game. You know, again, I don't feel a lot of pressure. I just don't believe Miami, win or lose this game, has the team right now to, after this game, go into New England and win, and then go into, wherever, whether it's Kansas City or wherever, and win. And so that is just their real, beat up team. And so, look, we made the playoffs. We got to see an unbelievably good game against Buffalo to make it into the playoffs. And I'd say just enjoy the ride, win or lose, enjoy the game. We're here, and it's good to be back.
Indeed. All right. So that's going to be it for this show. Thank you all so much for joining us. This will be up in the morning, and you'll be able to listen to it on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and, of course, our YouTube here at PhinManiacs. So thank you all so much for watching. Hopefully the Dolphins come out with a win, and if we're still talking playoffs next week, then we'll see you all then. And if not, we'll talk what Miami can do to make sure they get into the playoffs and beyond in 2017. Good night, everybody.